The National Prosecuting Authority, that's the NPA's head, Shamila Batohi, says that the NPA is not in a crisis and that there's no widespread sabotage of the Investigative Directorate or of the institution as a whole. Now, addressing the departure of the Investigative Directorate head, Advocate Hermione Cronje, Batohi said that there is nothing sinister about Cronje vacating office and that the institution has supported her departure. And answering questions about the delay in dealing with cases, Batohi said that the NPA does have capacity to prosecute certain complex and high crime cases. However, the nature of the state capture cases requires additional specialized skills and capacities. Now, last week, Accountability Now threatened to take the NPA and its head, Advocate Shamila Batohi, to court to force her to investigate and prosecute high-profile cases. And Open Secrets Director Hennie Van Vuuren is back with us, joins us virtually once more. Hennie, good to have you back, and thanks for being on Morning Live.
Morning, Sakina. Nice to be here. Thank you.
So we had this whole conversation last week, and of course yesterday there was a partial response to some of the issues that have been raised in the public domain through reports and institutions such as yours. But let's just start with the NDPP, Shamila Batohi, saying that there is no crisis and, you know, basically all is well. They have a few problems, but generally, all is well. Are you convinced after yesterday's briefing that that is the case?
Yeah, thanks, Sakina. I think that the public generally have reason to be very concerned as to what's happening at the NPA. Yesterday, Advocate Batohi effectively said it's almost dangerous to the institution for us to suggest that there is a crisis, to call into question what's happening. But I think it's incredibly important, if we believe in building institutions such as the NPA to protect us against predators involved in state capture, to protect the vulnerable in our society and to prosecute those in power, that we need to call it out when things are going wrong. And right now, I think things are going wrong. There's undoubtedly a crisis within the National Prosecuting Authority. And that crisis is a crisis in part of the public's confidence in the NPA. What we saw yesterday, Sakina, I'd argue, was an attempt by the National Director of Public Prosecutions to try and plaster up massive cracks that exist in her institution. She's led that institution now for approximately 36 months. And I think the departure of Hermione Cronje, while we might focus on her as the head of the Investigative Directorate as a person alone, I think it's important because her departure allows us to ask the hard questions of the NPA as to why it hasn't done the job that it has been tasked to do. And that's really one of those things, is obviously tackle the network that's benefited from state capture in South Africa. And we've seen almost no prosecutions happening. And I think that Hermione Cronje's exit is in large part a reflection of a deep frustration of the problems within the NPA, and that Shamila Batohi and her other leaders in the NPA are not doing enough to fix.
So let's talk about the Investigative Directorate set up specifically, or should I say in the main, to look at the state capture issue. And so you have the Zondo Commission running, and now there's an Investigative Directorate that's supposed to focus on this so that people are actually brought to book. But the admission coming yesterday that actually there have been no high-profile prosecutions. So let's talk about that and the reasons behind it. Why are they incapable as a prosecuting authority to actually prosecute complex, high-profile cases?
Sakina, I think it's important maybe just to step back just for a brief moment and recognize the fact that from the late 2000s, South Africa had no real capacity to tackle high-level economic crimes by an independent agency. We recall that there was the Scorpions, the unit within the NPA tasked with doing that. They were closed down largely by groups within the governing party, and particularly around former President Jacob Zuma, who no longer wanted that independent capacity within the NPA to tackle such crimes. And of course, that created the enabling environment for the latest round of state capture that we saw over the last 10 years or so. And so the creation of this independent directorate 3 years ago was an attempt to say the Hawks are not able to actually investigate many of these high-level crimes. We need capacity within the NPA to work with the hawks, so those are the police that are investigating, but who can prosecute. And I think what we've seen Hermione Cronje and her colleagues doing is operate in an absolutely frustrating environment. They have only recently been able to get an office. Her staff were not placed on permanent contracts, so people were coming and going and leaving. I know that the National Director of Public Prosecution said yesterday that they are looking into it, but that's simply not good enough, Sakina. 3 years in, if you want to build a team that you can keep, this is not the way to do it. From what I understand, there were senior advocates and others where it took months to bring them on board and for the senior management to approve them being brought on board. I've heard talk of some of the senior advocates not even being paid, who have been working with the NPA. I mean, I think, quite frankly, that you can't all rest at the door of Hermione Cronje. That does seem to be, in part, a much more deeper structural problem that the National Director needs to be held to account for when she appears in Parliament tomorrow. She can't get ahead of this problem in a press conference with something that runs much deeper. And obviously, because we rely so heavily on this investigative directorate to tackle the very big corporations that have benefited from state capture, and then networks like middlemen, the Guptas, the big players, and of course the politicians. There have been none of these individuals have been prosecuted, and when Advocate Batohi appears in front of Parliament tomorrow, she'll no doubt even have members on that committee, quite possibly, or people sitting in the gallery who are members of Parliament who themselves are implicated in state capture and who the NPA have not yet either had the guts or the interest to try and prosecute.
Oh, well, Hennie, and just speaking of that, again, when Shamila Batohi came in as the NDPP, it was against the backdrop of not just the NPA, but so many state institutions being hollowed out. And she was supposed to be this new broom that was going to come in, sweep clean, fix it all. And as you say, it's been years now, and still we don't seem to have made any significant strides, especially as it pertains to the corruption around the state capture narrative. So if we were to assess what is actually going on in terms of the resources that were supposed to be deployed to this particular mission, if you look at the fact that the network was supposed to be set up such that people will be brought to book, but it hasn't happened. So what should we be thinking as lay South Africans? Because it's not just the state capture issues. You look at the Steinhoff question, that case involving Marcus Uester, nothing.
Yeah, Sakina, I think the public have very good reason to be frustrated. And again, I think the point is that the capacity of the state to tackle high-level economic crimes has effectively been eviscerated. It's been destroyed over the state capture period, and that was part of the plan or the ploy. But the task that was given to the National Director and her team was to fix this. We heard her yesterday tell us that she was sacrificing for the nation. She's not sacrificing. She has been given one of the most important public offices in this country by the president and entrusted by that to perform a function in the interests of ordinary South Africans. And I think that it's not good enough to tell us that this is about love and charity. This is about commitment and integrity, and it takes strong management to set out a plan of what you're going to do. I fear what we're going to be seeing over the next while, Sakina, are more agreements with some of the big companies that they'll pay very big fines and they won't be prosecuted. We have, as Open Secrets and other civil society organizations, many problems with that, because that's how you turn those corporations into repeat offenders instead of trying to prosecute some of their senior officials and clawing back the full amount that's owed to the South African public for the social damage and the social harm that state capture has caused. It has resulted in the loss of hundreds of thousands of jobs, of people being pushed further into poverty, of people not having access to public resources like trains, for example, when we think of the case of PRASA and the other parastatals, there are many of those. So there's an incredible responsibility of the side of the NPA, not to just say we didn't manage this properly. You owe this to all South African people to do the best job that you have. And we don't see a plan from Shamila Batohi's office as to how she's going to go about and achieve this. And as you say, it's Steinhoff, it's a range of other cases that have taken place. And I think that this departure and the decision to resign by Hermione Cronje, Advocate Cronje, should allow us to do is really to pause. And it's not the response isn't one that's shrill or however the NPA leadership may see it, the response is to say, actually, this allows us to now shine a deep light on what we've seen as a problem coming a very long way. And if the NDPP can't fix it, then I think the question is that what are her and her leadership actually going to be, what is their decision about their own tenure at the organization? We want them to succeed, I think. We would like to see the Advocate Batohi and her team succeed, and we want to see the NPA succeed. But right now, I think there is too little to give the public real confidence that they are serious about tackling the powerful elites. They have the evidence, much of the evidence. They have access to the servers. If the problem is the hawks, we realize, for example, the hawks have been sitting on servers of material that have not been released to the NPA in some instances. Well, if that's the case, then why are they not asking the Minister of Justice and the President to call the Minister of Police in and ensure that the hawks are doing their jobs, if that's the problem, because clearly there are problems within the hawks as well. And so I think the part of the challenge lies within the NPA's leadership, part of the challenge lies within the hawks and the other institutions of state that are tackled tackling issues of state capture and high-level crimes. And of course, the political leaders generally can't escape some of the blame in that process either, Sakina.
So let's talk about the resources and whether the NPA is sufficiently capacitated to tackle some of these high-profile cases, because, as we say, in the case of Marcus Jooste and Steinhoff, you would think that this is an easy one to proceed with. All the information is on the table, whether they need that locally, internationally, it's well laid out. So, again, the incapacity or the inability to proceed with that prosecution, what does that say about the institution overall and its ability or inability to prosecute complex cases, given they would be going up against people who would be able to basically get the best legal minds to represent them?
Yeah, Sakina, I think, one way of looking at this issue is to recognize that we've done this before. If we look back in our own history as a country, and I go back to the example of the Scorpions in the mid-2000s, the ability of a South African anti-corruption agency, which was tasked by both senior experienced officials, but importantly by a group of young prosecutors, many of them were just coming out of university at that point, and investigators who were employed by the NPA were able to tackle some of the world's biggest arms companies involved in the arms deal at the time and a range of other important high-level economic crimes, seizing assets through asset forfeiture, etc. And so, we've seen ourselves build that capacity within the state. What we saw again was that capacity destroyed. And the question is, why are we not focusing first and foremost on the human beings that must do this work within the NPA? There doesn't seem to be the right mix of prosecutors and investigators that are working within the NPA for sure. We've heard horror stories of the inability of certain individuals, and we must be clear, these aren't all prosecutors. There are very many good, courageous officials within institutions like the NPA, or for that matter, the police and elsewhere, but certainly people that are struggling to compile charge sheets, very basic charge sheets against some of these big companies. And those individuals, I think some of them may very well have political malice or have a desire to undermine the prosecution of some of these high-level crimes, as you say, whether it's Stein or for a range of others. And for some, they simply don't have the skills to be able to tackle that. And those are somewhat complex, but those are things that can be tackled through HR processes. That's where the National Director of Public Prosecution's leadership should come in and deal with this. I think, just peddling back to this issue of Hermione Cronje, she was probably quite abrasive, we've heard, and brusque in the way in which she dealt with some colleagues who were not delivering. But I think she was calling it out for what it is in certain instances, and therefore, took flack because everybody wants everything to remain, kind of calm the waters. And I think it's imperative that the National Director of Public Prosecution shows a commitment to fixing the institutions, fixing it by ensuring she has a whole cadre of people and bringing in young people who want to believe that they want to work at the NPA and that they have a commitment to this country's constitutional democracy. And I think that's what they need to aspire to, an institution they need to aspire to work for. And right now, I don't think we're getting the signals from the NPA that that's the case. And of course, it is also a question of resources, Sakina. It is about our ability to be able to coordinate the activities within government departments. Let me just use the example again of the Guptas. It's not only a question of the NPA doing its work, it's also political pressure from the Minister of Justice and others on the government of the UAE, the small criminal state that has harbored the Guptas millions, or for that matter, the Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. Why are we not threatening to cut ties with that small country if they don't deliver these criminals and criminal networks back to South Africa and what's owed to us? So, it does take a kind of appetite to do these things at all levels, but there's a range of things that can be done to fix the NPA internally, remove the bad apples, of which there are many, and we are working hard to try and identify some of those as an organization as well, and make arguments as to why those individuals need to be removed, because there are a range of cases, Sakina, when we look at the issues of state capture. There's the very high level complex cases, but there are also so-called low-hanging fruit of directors of companies, whether it's in PRASA or if we're looking at matters around SAA, for example, whether it's Denel or SARS and others, where there are a range of cases that we can focus on directors and other individuals who can be prosecuted, removed as directors of companies, and start the process of holding some of these elites to account. And we don't see the NPA even grasping at the low-hanging fruit, although we've been saying, and I've said this directly to the National Director of Public Prosecutions almost 18 months ago, why are you not doing this? And the response has always been, that sounds like a fine idea. Well, that's not good enough. It's time that we see action, and we need a plan from the National Director of Public Prosecutions of what she's going to do, and that she needs to lay out to the South African public and to our public representatives in Parliament who need to ask her those hard questions tomorrow.
Indeed, and just finally, the TRC cases. And Shamila Batohi, just after being appointed, was here on Morning Live, and I specifically asked her about that. And again, there was a commitment given that this would be looked into. Well, it's already 3 years on, and still nothing really coming out of that. Yesterday, again, on the TRC cases, acknowledging that it has taken a long time. But these families are at their wits' end because, unfortunately, those implicated are dying. And it would seem as though this is almost, a plan around this particular matter, that you do nothing long enough and it will go away. So what's your take on the TRC cases and the NPA's unwillingness at this point to deal with it?
Yeah, Sakina, I think we run the risk of the public becoming cynical in its belief in that the NPA wants to deal with all manners of crime when we see the complete lackluster approach with dealing with apartheid crimes. And I think that we hear the voices of the families of the murdered and the disappeared, the Kalata family, but there are many other families who have been working tirelessly and together with human rights organizations to try and ensure that those prosecutions do take place. And there has only been one impediment after the other placed in that process, whether it's been the direct political interference, which we've seen over many years, which preceded, obviously, Shamila Batohi's tenure, but we saw that during the Mbeki presidency, and certainly some of that extended into the Zuma period and administration. But, I mean, clearly this was on the agenda the first day that Advocate Batohi took office. We heard yesterday a wishy-washy response from her deputy, Rodney de Kock, who frankly waffled on about the fact that these crimes date back to 1961. He's had these dockets on his and his colleagues' office for a number of years. The question really is why they don't proceed with those prosecutions where they can. Why is it that the families are forced in some instances to go to court to try and force the NPA to at last do something? And I think, frankly, there's a don't care attitude. It's not good enough for you to say that you want the public to believe in an institution that's going to bring justice. And then you look at a fundamental crime against humanity like apartheid, which happened in our recent history, and it's in the lived experience of the majority of South Africans who are living today, and you don't do your job. You are failing at doing your job. And that's exactly what's happened here, without a doubt. And maybe use one additional example in addition to the experiences of the families, but we brought a matter to the NPA's attention through a detailed evidence-laden docket more than 15 months ago, Sakina, about the role of banks that had propped up the apartheid regime and laundered hundreds of billions of rands around the world at the request of the South African government in Luxembourg and in Belgium. We have given all that evidence to the NPA. The only thing the NPA has done, and the Hawks, is to give these dockets to two tainted, compromised individuals who have covered up other investigations around apartheid crimes and have covered up other investigations, or been involved, rather, in facilitating, we believe in one instance, the crimes of state capture. Now, if these are the people that you entrust an incredibly serious, probably one of the most complex economic crimes we've seen happen in this country, and this is from the apartheid era, if you give it to these kind of people, these are the Keystone cops. They have no interest, we frankly fear, in seeing any justice, and their track record shows. We've pointed this out to the National Director. We at this stage, again, are faced with threatening to take the National Director, Public Prosecutions, to court to force her to do a job. The evidence we've done as civil society and given over to her officials, and of course to the Hawks, who've shown a similar level of incompetence in this matter. So I think it's deeply worrying when the evidence is there. You are able to proceed, and then the question really becomes, Sakina, I think it does rest with the leadership of that institution as a collective. Advocate Lecoq, Advocate Batohi, and all of their colleagues cannot now fudge this off on lower level officials. They've been made aware of this by civil society and by the families of the murdered and disappeared repeatedly without any action. And I think they need to be, they need to give us timelines. We need to see a plan of when all this is going to happen. You can't just kick this ball forward and hope for the best, which has frankly been the strategy to date.
Indeed. Hennie, tell you what, as you said, we are all going to be watching, waiting, listening tomorrow when the NPA appears before Parliament, and hopefully we'll be able to come back post that. Who knows, maybe there will be a more detailed plan laid out, in terms of some of the answers that were still lacking yesterday. But of course, we'll be in touch, see if something comes out of that. But thank you so much for your time. Hennie Van Vuuren is the Director of Open Secrets, reacting to the NPA's press briefing yesterday, and Shamila Batohi, the NDPP, talking about and addressing some of the questions being put to the organization, and also about some of the high-profile cases that the NPA has failed to prosecute.